Rebecca Langford's voice sliced through the soft music and gentle buzz of conversation that floated over the oceanfront lawn of her Long Island estate as she stared at the woman standing near the garden path and snapped, "Security, get this woman off the property. Now." The afternoon light glowed across white tents and crystal glasses, catching on the diamonds at Rebecca's throat and wrists as she stood in her elegant dress, every inch the rich hostess of a perfect wedding. But all her attention was locked on the calm, simply dressed black woman in a navy dress and low heels who stood with straight shoulders and quiet eyes at the edge of the celebration. Without lowering her voice, Rebecca said that this was a private family event on private land, and she wouldn't let some stranger wander around like she belonged there. The woman didn't flinch. Her hands stayed at her sides, her face composed, and in a soft, steady voice she replied that there must be a misunderstanding. Rebecca stepped closer, her tone dropping to a harder edge as she told the woman she was mistaken if she thought she had any right to be here, explaining that this estate wasn't just any house, it was old money, long ties, a place where only certain people were invited. She made it clear the stranger did not fit into any of those circles. The woman apologized quietly for causing confusion, but Rebecca only laughed under her breath and accused her of walking in as if she owned the place. With a snap of her fingers, she called over 2 security guards and told them to escort the woman out before she embarrassed herself further or decided to steal something. The guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but stepped toward the woman. Instead of arguing, the woman nodded and said, "If you insist," with a calm that unsettled everyone watching. She didn't head straight for the gate though. She turned and started walking down the stone garden path like someone moving through a memory instead of a stranger trespassing where she shouldn't be. Her steps avoided a loose, wobbling stone without even looking down. She curved around a bed of roses at just the right distance, staying clear of the hidden sprinklers buried in the soil. She cut through a narrow path behind the carriage house that most guests didn't even know existed. The catering manager, mid-sentence with Rebecca, stopped the moment he saw the woman move with that kind of ease. Rebecca caught his stare and demanded to know what he was looking at, and he quickly muttered that everything was fine, though his eyes betrayed him. Staff all over the lawn began to react the same way. A housekeeper paused with a cloth in her hand, forgetting to finish wiping a table. 2 servers whispered while pretending to rearrange glasses. The head groundskeeper, an older man in a worn cap, stood still at the edge of the lawn and slowly removed his hat as the woman passed, bowing his head like he was greeting someone who once held great importance here. Rebecca saw it all and grew more irritated by the second. She muttered that everyone was acting strangely over nothing, as if the place were haunted. The woman reached the reflecting pool and stopped. Water arched from the fountain in the center, droplets catching sunlight, but her eyes weren't on the water. They went to the stone base, to a faint rectangular scar where a brass plaque had obviously once been bolted. Her fingertips drifted over that spot as if she could still feel the words that had been removed. An aging valet finally found the courage to step toward her, his hands shaking. In a hoarse whisper he asked, "Miss Danielle, is that really you?" Rebecca's head snapped around with disbelief. She demanded to know if he recognized the stranger and told him to explain himself. His face worked through shock and guilt as he stammered that the woman used to come here long ago, before Rebecca's family moved in. The woman turned to him with a gentle smile, greeting him by name and complimenting how well he still took care of the grounds. His eyes filled with tears as he told her she looked just like her father would have wanted, and that he'd be proud of the woman she'd become. Rebecca stepped sharply between them and ordered the valet back to his post, shouting that his conversation was over. He obeyed, but not before throwing one more pained look at the woman he'd just called Miss Danielle. She watched him go, her face steady but her eyes heavy with old hurt. Around them, whispers spread quickly in the staff areas. The head butler hovered in the doorway of the main house, pale and stiff. 2 housekeepers clung to each other, their mouths forming silent prayers. The servers moved faster but kept sneaking glances. The tension wasn't about some random intruder anymore. It was about someone returning who meant something to the bones of the place. The wedding coordinator approached Rebecca and nervously tried to change the subject to ceremony timing, but Rebecca cut her off, insisting she wouldn't allow a stranger to wander around and scare everyone. Meanwhile, Danielle continued her quiet movements through the property, not like a thief scouting targets but like someone checking for familiar markers. She paused under an old oak tree, laid a hand on the bark, and found the faint carved initials that time couldn't completely erase. She walked along a side path and stopped at a back door to the house, where the old brass knob, though rubbed nearly smooth, still showed a ghost of a crest someone had tried to sand away. Her fingers traced the shape as if tracing her own family name. The old groundskeeper watched, torn between loyalty to current employers and loyalty to the past. Finally Rebecca exploded, striding across the stone terrace in her heels, each step loud and sharp. She told security this charade had gone on long enough and commanded them to remove the woman at once. The guards walked up to Danielle and apologized as they asked her to come with them. She rose from the bench and agreed with grace, moving with them toward the gate. Rebecca raised her voice loud enough for guests to hear, declaring that she wouldn't tolerate strangers crashing her daughter's wedding and acting like they belonged. Guests turned, eyes narrowed. An older woman with a heavy necklace asked if there was a problem. Rebecca explained, with a brittle laugh, that this unknown woman had walked in from the street and started acting as if she had some claim here, as if their family would ever be involved with someone like that. The phrase hung heavy and mean in the open air. Danielle kept walking, shoulders straight, dignity intact. Some guests muttered that it was about time she was removed. Others accused her of looking for a handout, planning a lawsuit, or checking the place out to steal something. At the wrought iron gate, Danielle paused and looked back at the house and at the people clustered across the lawn. She didn't shout or threaten. Instead she slowly let her eyes pass over each face, noting who sneered, who smiled, and who looked away in shame. Rebecca noticed and accused her of memorizing them for future trouble, asking why she was staring. Danielle answered simply that she was just taking in the scene. It had been a long time since she'd seen the estate full. Rebecca scoffed that it was probably the first time the woman had seen a world she couldn't buy into. The photographer nearby lowered his camera nervously. He had caught almost everything: the confrontation, the staff's reactions, the posture of the woman being sent away. When Rebecca saw him pointing the lens in that direction, she barked at him to delete any photos that showed the stranger, saying she didn't want this embarrassment recorded. He nodded and scrolled, pretending to erase, though his fingers never actually hit delete. Danielle watched, and something sharp and thoughtful passed through her eyes. Outside the gate, she walked to a car parked along the quiet road, opened the trunk, and pulled out a leather briefcase. One of the guards asked nervously what was inside, and she replied that it was just documentation. Then, instead of driving away, she turned and walked calmly back through the gate with the briefcase in her hand, as if she had every right in the world to cross that line. When the staff saw her return, whispers erupted again. Rebecca's anger hit a new level as she saw Danielle come back and sit at an empty table on the edge of the lawn. She snapped that this was harassment, maybe grounds for calling the police. Danielle didn't interrupt the wedding. She simply opened her briefcase, laid out papers and a legal pad, and began reviewing them with the focus of someone used to serious work. A server approached to offer water, but Rebecca rushed over and ordered that nobody serve the woman anything because she wasn't a guest. Guests started to cluster, talking louder, calling Danielle rude, crazy, or delusional. They accused her of pretending to have power she clearly didn't have. Rebecca confronted Danielle, demanding to know what she was writing, and Danielle answered that she was keeping a record of behavior, of how people act when they think the person they're mistreating has no power at all. Rebecca laughed and called it pathetic. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Detective Ray Coleman walked up from the parking area in a dark suit, invitation still in his pocket. Rebecca greeted him with relief and asked him to help deal with the problem. But when Ray's eyes landed on Danielle, his entire posture changed. The blood drained from his face, and his voice turned respectful as he greeted her. He called her Your Honor before he could catch himself. The entire lawn went silent. Rebecca stared at him, stunned, and demanded to know why he used that title. Ray, realizing there was no walking it back, told her quietly that she needed to be very careful in how she spoke to this woman. Rebecca scoffed and claimed again that this was her land and that Danielle was trespassing. Ray pulled out his phone and checked the county property records, reading aloud that the estate had been purchased many decades ago by a man named Washington, passed down through the Washington line, and that the current recorded owner was Danielle Washington Harper, taxes paid through a family trust for years. There was no sale recorded to the Langford family. Suddenly, it wasn't just a rude guest standing on private property. It was the legal owner standing on land others had been living on as if it were theirs. Rebecca's voice faltered as she insisted her husband had bought the place. But there were no deeds in her name in the public record, only continuous ownership by Danielle's family. Their attorney arrived, confident until he saw Danielle and recognized her as a federal judge, a United States District Court judge with lifetime appointment. The groom himself, hearing the raised voices, came over in confusion, and when he saw Danielle his face went pale with recognition. He quietly confessed that he had once stood in front of her in federal court on serious financial crime charges and that she could have sent him to prison for most of his adult life. Instead, she had chosen a different sentence: community service, repayment, education, and a chance to start again. He told the assembled guests, into the microphone meant for toasts, that the woman his mother had tried to throw out had actually saved his future. As the truth unfolded, it became clear that Danielle's family had built and owned the estate for generations and that 20 years earlier, paperwork and lies had slowly erased their name from the visible story, even as the legal records and tax payments still tied the land to them. Danielle had every right to file charges, to remove the Langfords and bring down the full weight of federal law on them for fraud and illegal occupation. She had the badge of a judge behind her and documentation in her briefcase to prove every word. Rebecca, who had spent the day treating her like a nuisance and worse, now stood on shaking legs, completely at the mercy of the person she had tried to humiliate. Yet Danielle didn't shout. She didn't demand they all leave that second. She didn't roar about punishment. Instead, in a composed, steady voice, she spoke about what her family had done on that land, about a grandfather who laid stones, a father who tended gardens, a name scraped off doors to make room for someone else's ego. She explained that she had come ready to reclaim what was hers and to press charges if she had to. But then she looked at the groom whose life she had already given back once. She said that seeing how he had changed, how he admitted his guilt and tried to live better, reminded her that true justice wasn't just about crushing people, it was about accountability and change. So she laid down her conditions instead of her full wrath. She told Rebecca she would keep legal ownership but would allow the family to stay as long as they respected the truth. She required a public apology to every staff member mistreated and threatened that day. She insisted that the Washington family crest be restored to the gates and doors, that her family's name no longer be buried. She directed that a fund be created in her family's honor to support young people who needed a chance, the kind of chance she had once given Rebecca's son. Their lawyer, frightened and humbled, agreed to every term. Rebecca, stripped of her false power, nodded through tears and said she would do whatever was asked. Danielle also demanded that the staff's years of quiet loyalty be formally recognized, especially those who remembered the old times and carried the guilt of keeping silent. Then she closed her briefcase, gave the groom a long, steady look, and reminded him that his second chance came not from money or influence but from mercy, something he now had a responsibility to pass on. When Danielle turned to leave, the same workers who had watched in nervous silence now straightened their shoulders. The groundskeeper wiped his cheeks. The valet held his cap to his chest. The butler lowered his head with respect. Some guests couldn't bear to meet her eyes, others looked at her with a new, uneasy kind of understanding. At the gate, she paused, taking one final look at the estate her family had built and that others had claimed so loudly. She said that for years this place had been just a wound to her, a symbol of something stolen. Today, it had turned into a lesson, for people who thought money meant power, for those who stayed silent when wrong was being done, and for herself, about what it means to hold power in your hands and choose not just to win, but to do what is right. Then she stepped through the gate, leaving a wedding forever changed and a family finally forced to admit the truth about the ground beneath their feet.